right, so my remarks are kind of like in three buckets today. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what AI is, kind of a very brief intro for those who haven't spent much time thinking about what is artificial intelligence, what do people mean when we talk about it. I'm going to talk also about how it's transforming society. So this is an area I cover a little bit more as an economist and following what's going on in Silicon Valley and other parts of the country. And then the third piece I'll talk a little bit about, and Pastor Chan will probably talk more about, is how should Christians think about technology in general and AI in particular? How does this connect to the cultural mandate, to the command to have dominion in the earth and to fill it and subdue it? So that's what I'm going to talk about. So first, what is artificial intelligence? There's probably a few different ways to define it. Something you may have heard of is large language models, right? So if you go online and you look up an AI model, whether it's Gemini or Grok or ChatGPT, these are primarily large language models. So they're models that are built around language. And that's part of what makes artificial intelligence so interesting, is that it uses words and human language. And so we can talk with it and it can talk with us in a way that when you're working with code, normally the code doesn't talk to you, so you have to be a programmer to say, what the heck is going on in my code and the errors. This is different, where it uses words and language. And so anyone can kind of ask questions and read and interact with it. There's a lot of voice dimensions to this so that people can interact with it on their phones or on their commutes. And so it's a large language model. At its core, I think we should think about artificial intelligence as the new frontier of computation. So computers are a form of computation, or allow us to do computation. So you have mainframes, then you have the PCs. Computers are getting more powerful. You have word processing, you have Excel, you have programs, applications. The internet, cloud is a part of that. Artificial intelligence, these large language models and variations on them, I would argue, is sort of the next stage of compute. Right? It's doing, in many ways, a similar kind of thing. The novelty is the use of language. That's the big change, or why it feels very different. But in terms of what's actually going on, it is similar in many ways to the computing we've always done. The way these language models work, just at a basic level, is when you type a query into ChatGPT and it gives you a response, that response is built around a kind of algorithm. So it has a model and an algorithm, and basically the model is predicting probabilistically what is the next word, or most likely or most probable word. Given all of the data it's trained on, all of the things that it's seen and looked at in terms of stuff online, language, it basically is an incredibly powerful predictive algorithm about what's the next appropriate word to use in answering that query or in formulating a response. So there's still a lot of algorithms involved. It involves computation. This is kind of an extension of what people used to call machine learning. So 10, 15, 20 years ago, people talked about machine learning, the way in which you can take computer models and run tons of data through it, and the computer models can actually learn from the data and begin to make changes and patterns that you wouldn't see as a human being, but the programming picks up on. And so the final thing I'll say in terms of like the structure of artificial intelligence, these large language models, is that there's also an element of what we might call recursivity. That is to say, part of what makes this technology powerful is that it's improving very quickly. So it has lots of information it trains on, data it trains on, but then it learns from people's interacting with it as we talk with it. It learns from feedback. You can tailor, program. Tanner might speak to some of this in more particular ways, but part of what's interesting about this artificial intelligence is that you can kind of direct it towards certain projects or topics you're interested in. You can teach it in certain ways. There are certain kinds of models that we call agents, where you can build agents, whether it's an open source agent or some other kind of agent, and these agents can interact with you and do more specific kinds of tasks and activities. They can remember conversations you've had, information you've given it, and so it can become ever more powerful in terms of being tailored to the things you care about, the things you're interested in, the things that you're trying to do, whether that's building databases, analyzing data, analyzing documents, drafting documents. So for example, like I've got like little mini agents that I work on. One is sort of an editor to help me with my prose and my writing, to give me comments and ideas, feedback on this is kind of wordy, maybe you can change that. I've got sort of a little marketing thing, so I send like YouTube clips and audio through that. Okay, help me think about posts for X or LinkedIn or other things that I might do there. I've got one for just sort of general planning purposes. There's different ways you can tailor this. Tanner, again, may speak to some of what he's done with his agent or agents. So that's what AI is. So you can interact with it just like an advanced Google search. So that's how a lot of people use it. It's a good place to start. But it is really powerful in terms of the applications, the way you can tailor it. But fundamentally, it's computational. It involves algorithms, and it involves language. And that's why we can talk with it. It talks to us, and it feels very powerful. There's certainly more that could be said about that. But I want to shift to the impact it's having on society and the economy. So for those of you who don't know, these AI models require a tremendous amount of computation. So they use semiconductor or computer chips. They're called GPUs, graphic processing units. These GPUs, NVIDIA is one of the major companies that manufactures these, which is why it's like a $5 trillion company at the moment. These GPUs are huge, by the way. It's not like a little chip on your motherboard. These are sort of like complicated, big things that are put together. And the way these models are built and the way they process is that you have places like Google or ChatGPT are building data centers. So these are large buildings full of racks of GPUs, like hundreds or thousands of these complicated, expensive processing units. And then they all get networked together, and that's what they train their models on. And so when you send a query, when you type something into ChatGPT, there's a model that's been trained and built, but then it also is querying the database, the internet. And so you need these data centers, you need the GPUs, and you also need a great deal of electricity to power these. And so you may have heard in different contexts about data centers and electricity generation, power limitations. What we're seeing right now in the economy is almost unprecedented, or really is unprecedented in a lot of ways. You have large tech companies and other companies that are called hyperscalers, just like these massive building companies that are spending literally hundreds of billions of dollars just this year to build data centers. And many of these data centers, the amount of electricity they use, I was talking with a guy just last week, and he's out in Iowa near Omaha, and his family has some farmland a little bit outside the city, and there's some natural gas pipelines that run there. And so they've been approached by Google, I think, wants to build a data center there. And the amount of power, like the power plant and the power they want to build for that data center is more than the power for Omaha. This is a massive amount of energy. And these are being built all over the country, a lot in Texas, a lot in Virginia, other places. They can operate with all kinds of different electricity we could talk about. This is part of just an enormous boom and shift in production. So these data centers are drawing in tens of thousands of electricians, of carpenters. They're sucking in a whole lot of blue-collar labor to build these things as quickly as possible. They're looking for energy wherever they can, whether that's natural gas or coal, or sometimes trying to do renewable. Nuclear is on the horizon here, trying to develop and rebuild nuclear power in the US. So energy is a really important piece of this puzzle. The GPUs are an important piece. There's other elements, there's memory, there's other kinds of software we don't know to go into right now. But this is a big story. It's a big part of the economy, a growing part of the economy, probably the biggest investment we've ever seen in a given year on a single kind of area of the economy. So this is big business because they need basically as much computation as they can get and more. And so the rate of use of these models is going up exponentially. The power of these models is going up exponentially. It's a huge economic factor right now. Now, on the consumption or the use side, the other thing, and there's more debate about this, but I think it's fairly undeniable that productivity is also going up in many places where people are learning how to use these tools well, okay? These tools can save people a tremendous amount of time, whether it's putting PowerPoints together, analyzing spreadsheets, drafting documents, prepping different kinds of meeting notes. So there's all kinds of things that it can do. It can increasingly do different kinds of tasks for you. My brother, for example, has an agent that will send sort of prospecting emails for him. So he gives it various parameters and things, and it will just sort of draft emails and correspond with people and just sort of direct them, those who want to meet with him, and set up a call. So he basically has like an assistant that's doing dozens and dozens of emails, targeted emails to different people he's interested in connecting with or talking with. And it's going on every day. Sorry, I just keep something off. And that's something where you would have hired somebody in the past, and now or you might have hired somebody, but now he's doing that. So there's lots of ways that agents are analyzing data, that they're doing things for us. Productivity is on the rise. Let me give you another kind of interesting example of this. So the CEO of NVIDIA, which is the most valuable company in the world by market cap that builds the GPUs that are powering this, the CEO of NVIDIA said when they hire software engineers, they'll pay those software engineers $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. But then he sort of expects that they will spend another $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 on AI tokens or credits. So that basically they'll be using AI that you have to pay for these credits to use them. It's like kind of data that you pay for, that they'll be using hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of data in their models. And he said, if any engineer comes to me and says, hire me, but I'm not going to use AI, I'm not going to use these models. He said that would be akin to hiring somebody who says, I'm not going to use a computer, I'm going to use pen and paper. Right? That doesn't make any sense when you have computers. And similarly, to use computers without AI, especially in the software area, makes no sense either. And so part of what's going on, part of why there's so much money involved is that as people use AI, whether it's firms or individuals, they pay for these tokens, they pay for their usage, and then again, tens or hundreds of billions of dollars is being spent on this. So productivity is increasing, a lot of money is flowing into it. You've got data centers, you've got energy. One of the big questions, and we can definitely talk about this, is what will this mean for jobs, for people? If AI can do many things that people used to do, are we going to see a significant increase in unemployment? Are people going to shift the kinds of jobs that they do? Where's the productivity going to come from? I think there's a lot of historical examples we can go into here that give us reason for optimism, that there are many technological advances in the past that have replaced certain kinds of human work, whether digging ditches or plowing with a horse or building and moving things by hand versus you have forklifts now, you have assembly lines, you have automation. I think this is going to be a similar kind of improvement. So there's going to be disruption, there's going to be change, but there's going to be, I think, a lot of opportunity as well in the economy. So what AI is, these large language models, this technology, some of the ways it's affecting the economy, there's a lot more we could talk about there. The final thing I want to leave you with, and then I'll turn it over to Tanner, is just some introductory remarks about how we might want to go about thinking through this as Christians. So most of you, I think, are familiar. If you think about in Genesis, what God commands Adam and Eve to fill the earth, to multiply, to subdue the earth, and have dominion over it. Theologians call this the cultural mandate. It's this idea that God intends for his people to go out into the world and to rule as his vice regents, to bring order from chaos, and also to be creative, to build and create things. And that's part of what it means to be made in God's image. That's part of what he wants human beings to do. And technology, I think, is a part of that, right? That part of having dominion over the earth and exercising our creativity is using the tools and the technology and building tools and technology to help us do the things that honor God, that help build his kingdom. And so as a Christian who reads the cultural mandate that way, I tend to be on the more kind of optimistic side and the more sort of pro-technology side. There's tons of dangers and problems, and we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about that, sort of addictive natures, things being misleading. There's certainly dangers to any kind of technology. And internet, social media, those have particular kinds of dangers, especially for younger people. So again, it's not a naive embrace I'm suggesting here that it's all good all the time. But I think our posture should be one of curiosity, one of imagination, and one of openness to how can we use these tools, understand them and use these tools, because they're going to be used, they're going to be out there. And if we don't understand them, we're going to find our world and our lives ruled by something we don't understand, as opposed to taking dominion and using these tools well for the kingdom. So I'll stop there. Again, that's kind of my general disposition. There's a lot of other things we can go into, but I'll let Tanner give some thoughts and then we'll have some Q&A.
All righty. Thank you, Paul. Before I jump into the components that I really wanted to speak on, I did want to make a comment on the economic front as well. And this is not usually my field, but Paul is not overstating the impact that this is currently having on world economies. We're talking about it in my very limited sector. And somebody within our organization put together just a comparison of major industrial revolutions and bubbles down through history and the outsized impact that AI is having right now on our economies is startling compared to many previous iterations. I'll just give you examples. Peak U.S. railroad during the 90s constituted 5 to 6% of the GDP of the United States at that time. Big oil in the 1970s was about 8 to 10% of US GDP. And then finally, the largest sector that we had was the telecom or dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, and that constituted 15 to 20% of GDP. If you look at the top 6 companies within the S&P, that's NVIDIA, Apple, Alphabet, which is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta. They're all in AI. That's 61% of US GDP. That's 3 times larger than the telecom dot-com bubble. So we have just an outsized amount of the US economy banking on AI, right? And so I think it's really important for us to think about this and understand this. And this leads me into what I first want to talk about is you kind of tend to have two sides of the coin on this. Some people are doomsdaying about it, that essentially humanity's over, Terminator is here, we're all going down, that type of thing. And then you have others who have a more optimistic bent, right? Like implant AI in me, and then all of a sudden I will become, some superhuman cyborg, okay? And I'm with Paul. I think we need to have a cautiously optimistic approach to this. And I want to speak a little bit about the doomsdayism. My introduction to AI was actually a book that I read from Eric Larson, and I read it like 4 or 5 years ago. And it's called The Myth of Artificial Intelligence. And it was just fascinating to me. It's one of these ones that was like a random monograph I pulled off, and I was like, yeah, let me try that one, And I started reading through it, and it was fascinating because I hadn't been using AI much. I'd heard of it, of course, but, he makes the case in that book that AI is never going to be capable of developing a consciousness like human beings have, that it's kind of a category error to assume that abilities to amass large amounts of data and compute them and understand language and all that type of stuff is somehow equivalent to human consciousness. That we're really comparing not apples and oranges here, like you're comparing apples and spaceships, that they're just completely different categories, human consciousness versus what LLMs are able to do. Okay. And so I found that interesting. And he makes some cases in there, like certain aspects of human reasoning and things like that are not really consistent with what AI can do and what large language models are capable of. So it's a different category altogether. Now, he may be wrong about that. There are some theories of consciousness out there that essentially state that when you connect large amounts of information together, that's actually what consciousness is. Consciousness emerges or arises from the connections in large amounts of information. And many people who say this say that's what our brains have done. We've connected large amounts of information and all our neurons and synapses, and consciousness has arisen from that. But it's a minority position, and I lean in the direction of it's a different category altogether. So with that, I think that would cause us to have a posture that is skeptical but open to it, right? We want to be careful, but we don't want to, just run away with it and be like, okay, we'll do whatever, all right? So that's one aspect on the taking care around AI thing. The next thing I want to talk about is if you're not worried that like Terminator's happening, that there is just a general disposition that people have that it's like, well, okay, fine, consciousness can't happen, but AI is making us stupid. Okay, I don't know if you've heard that or seen that or whatever. And it's pretty easy to look into that perspective because you get to the point where people like won't even think for themselves. Basic tasks, let me just ask AI and see what AI tells me, because at the end of the day, they have all the answers. And I do think that's a concern, that we will not use AI while thinking critically at the same time. It's a good tool, but I think many people out there, because they don't quite understand how it works, and we do have a lot of the cultural background of Terminator, Matrix type stuff, people generally assume that AI is more brilliant than Einstein and human beings are never going to be able to do what AI is capable of doing. And so we need to be concerned about that. But that's where I would encourage us to think about AI as a tool, as something that we can utilize or leverage for kingdom purposes and ideas. From what I've seen, I've started using AI myself within only the last 2 to 3 months. Somebody sent me an article, I read it, I was interested, I started dabbling and looking into it. I've now spun up an AI agent and I work with a second one, and I've messed around with it quite a bit. And there really is no substitute for understanding the technology than messing around with it. That's really the best way you can start to figure it out. It's the difference between, reading a manual on how to ride a bike versus getting on one yourself and trying to, move it around. It's a whole different world entirely. And I think that AI has several benefits for us. It's really good at synthesizing complex thoughts and ideas, taking a bunch of different pieces of information and kind of bringing them together for you in a way that would really take you a lot of time if you were just working on it by yourself. In the past, you would have to read mountains of literature, let's say if you were doing a PhD or something like that, in order to begin to get the lay of the land, as it will, on a particular topic. AI can get the lay of the land very quickly, just because it can read so much faster than you can read. It would take me, 20 hours of reading to read a book that I plug into AI and it says it's done in 2 minutes. It's just insane how much data it can bring together. And so it can get the lay of the land relatively quickly. And so AI is really good at exposing you to general knowledge and perspectives just because it has so much training data and ideas. And that's really helpful. If you have generalized questions, especially in a field that you don't know much about, AI can be a powerful tool. You guys know I'm not a handyman. Our furnace went out, our boiler, and I just started taking pictures of components on my phone and throwing them at the AI and said, my boiler went out. What's wrong? And it said, well, that's a such and such model boiler. Check this area. And so I checked it. I didn't even know what I'm looking at. It's just a bunch of wires. So I took a picture of the wires and they said, all those wires look good. Go over here, right? And I was like, okay, I took a picture of that. You know what it ended up being? The fuse had blown. I wouldn't have known that, right? And it's an Edison fuse. It twists out like a light bulb. Some of you guys know this and you're like, yeah, this is standard knowledge, Tanner. I didn't have a clue. Guess what? I didn't have to call anybody. I went down to ACE, I bought a fuse, I came and screwed it in, and my boiler fired right up. And AI walked me through that whole process with pictures. You can just take pictures of things. It's not like I had to type out to it, trying to explain to it what's going on. I just took a picture, I shot it, and it told me what to do. And so general knowledge, I don't know, I was talking to somebody here in the church, and they were saying that they were like, I'm a YouTube mechanic. Right. And the idea being they can do a lot of mechanical work, but they just YouTube everything. I'll watch a video on how to, change this or do that. AI is making that even faster because if nobody, let's say you were, changing out the engine on your 1992 Nissan and nobody had done a video about it. Well, there are some similarities from other ones, but you're trying to kind of make sense. AI can help you walk through your specific situation in a way that if somebody didn't produce a YouTube video for it, you wouldn't be able to otherwise. One thing I've used AI to do is to quiz me and improve my knowledge on certain aspects or things like that. You guys know I've been doing a PhD for a while. I put it on pause. I started running books through it on, hey, I'm reading this book. What do you think? Let's chat about chapter 2. Here are some ideas that I thought. Here are some ideas you came up. And it was stimulating conversation partner as I read through that book, as I was trying to understand that. And so I think that was very powerful. I read a book a long time ago called Make It Stick. And it was the philosophy of how human beings learn. And a lot of it is through repetitive practice, trying to remember things that you can't. Whenever you have something just on the tip of your tongue, just so you know, that's when your memory is like working the hardest. And if you can find that idea, then you're really going to be able to cement it into your memory. I would say, tell the AI, I read this book, start quizzing me on it. I just read chapter 5. Okay, what is his term for this? Man, I don't remember, and I'll try to guess and create flashcards and different things like that. Seamless, very, very helpful on trying to improve my own knowledge and understanding. And you can get it to automate a lot of tasks. There are many things that it can just kind of do and automate it. Jess has been recently, we've been going to a naturopath for some of her health issues, and she essentially shared some of the symptoms she's been having and she had some blood work done, and I'm just looking at a giant ream of numbers. I don't know what any of them mean. Well, the AI knew what they meant. And they said, you're high on this, you're low on this, you're et cetera. And then Jess fed the naturopath's recommendations on supplements right into the AI and said, hey, given my numbers, this is what my naturopath recommended. And the AI said, honestly, these are good recommendations. You might look for this over here, or you might bump this one up. Talk to your doctor or physician. I'm not a financial advisor or a medical professional, but it was a little bit confirmation. Just was like, okay, maybe I'm not seeing a quack doctor Looney Tune, right? There might be something to this. So it can be very helpful in that regard. Now, I want to give some challenges. Just want to talk about the challenges on working with it that I have found. First of all, it often generalizes from its broad training data. And so I have found if there is an area that you are an expert in, sometimes the AI gets things wrong. And not only that, it gets things wrong confidently. I have had to correct the AI, even very good models, on the handful of small areas that I would consider myself close to expert level in, where I'm talking with it, I'm like, that's not correct. And then it'll say, oh, you're right, I dug deeper and ... It is often generalizing from large amounts of data and information. So if you know nothing about medicine, you're likely going to get a helpful generalized opinion from it. It's smarter than your average bear on any sort of general random topic. But if you're a surgeon and you go in and you start asking it questions about surgery, you are going to be like, no, that that's fallacious, that's wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, et cetera. And I've found this time and time again in several different areas that I'm fairly well studied and read in. So you got to be careful about that. And that's one of the challenges, because a lot of people will use it thinking that it's expert level in everything. And it's just not. And it's confident about its answers. I've had to correct it multiple times on various things. And then it will dig deeper and go, oh yeah, you're right, I was wrong, I'm so sorry about that, right? And so that's one interesting thing that I have found. Another thing that is very interesting is its persistent memory. And this is where AI agents can be helpful, because if you treat like just a chat window, it doesn't remember anything. And the more Paul talked about these tokens it uses, it spends tokens to try and go do things, right? It's kind of the currency of AI models. But if you want it to hold memory, it takes more and more tokens for it to keep a long list of memory. So it's like a trade-off. It's like, I want you to remember a bunch of stuff so you understand the context of our conversation. But every time I ask you questions and you're remembering a bunches of stuff, it's costing quite a bit of energy and compute power. So often when you're working with it, it'll do something called compaction, where it's like, let me summarize our conversation to this point so that I have broad outlines of what we've been talking about, but I'm not remembering mountains of data. Well, when it summarizes. And sometimes it forgets some really important nuances and details regarding your previous aspect of the conversation. When you interact with it on a regular or persistent basis, it's like this thing has perpetual amnesia, right? It just keeps forgetting very important things. And, you get tired. I'm like, this is the 5th time I've reminded you of this, blah, 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 And so that can absolutely happen, right? The final thing that I think in terms of our challenges associated with this, and Paul alluded to this, I wrote it down after he was speaking, because it made me think about this, is you've got so much information coming out now from AI. I think discernment is going to be one of the most important human attributes that we develop going forward, because more and more AI slop is coming out there, because any Joe Schmo can throw in there prompts, ideas, etc. You can get AI to write you a book in a minute, and this is funny. I wasn't going to talk about this. I was working on some leadership stuff at work, and it was specifically on the topic of delegating. I'm not a very good delegator. I don't do well working with people in that regard. So I went on Amazon and I just searched for books on delegation and management, and I grabbed 3 books that I thought looked interesting. I was reading through one of them, and it took me a little bit, but I was like a little bit away into chapter 1 or chapter 2, and then I was like, this entire book is written by AI. And I started flipping through, and then I could, once I saw it, it was so clear as day. And somebody spit that out on Amazon, and I paid good American dollars for it, to read this AI slop book. And some people might read the thing and not have the discernment to even know that it's AI. And so I think that's really important. Discernment is going to be needed now more than ever. It's important for us to develop our discernment, because more and more AI slop is coming out. There's a little thread on Reddit. Reddit's a giant chat board. I fasted from X for Lent. It was partial fast because I just changed to Reddit, right? So there you go. Yes, exactly. I didn't quite fulfill the spirit of the law on that one. But I found this one, and there's a Reddit page called "Is This AI?" And you get people upload photos, they upload book titles, all that type of stuff, and it's funny, like you now have like these internet sleuths looking for the telltale signs that this is AI. They didn't get the textures quite right. Well, this thing looks funky over there. If AI is ever like rendering in an image like words or letters, sometimes they won't make any sense at all. It won't even be English. Like you can see it was trying. I do think the models are going to get better at that. And it's going to be harder and harder to tell. And there's a real question out there of like, wow, there's this piece of art. I kind of like it. It might be AI. I don't know. And then you have artists who have developed a style over time that many AIs are copying at this point. And now they can't get their work sold because a lot of people think it's AI work, when in reality it's not. Discernment is going to be really important going forward. Just a couple of uses that I've had for AI to kind of close here. Like I said, I've used it as a study assistant. As I started using it as a study assistant, I'm not going to lie, guys, I asked myself, do I even need a PhD advisor? Because when I asked it, I'm reading these 3 books, recommend similar books in the field, boom, it gave me 20. And then I could dig into those and start, and the way it could do that, your PhD advisor only knows what they know. They only know what they've read. The AI has so much trading data that you're able to really get adjacent authors and fields and things like that are very helpful. So I've used it for that. I have utilized AI to critique my sermons. I cannot get higher than 4 out of 5 stars. It's impossible, guys. But it gives such helpful feedback, honestly. on my structure, the components that I'm working. And so I'm using it to try and improve my craft. I have it review each of my sermons, and it writes me a critique. Sometimes it's wrong. Paul defended me one time. I really appreciate that. He thought the AI was being a little too harsh. It's one of those things you can use it to try and push yourself and improve yourself as well. And I've also utilized it in my sermon prep process. Some of you guys know I have a large Logos library. I extracted my entire Logos library out of Excel. I have it in a document. And then I feed it into AI and I say, this week I'm preaching on Philemon, and I think the topic of, relationships in the church is going to be important. Scan my entire Logos library for books that would be relevant to relationships in the church. And it goes, here you go. I recommend you look at these 3 or 4 titles. And it would have taken me hours to skim through all of that. I just extracted an Excel document, and it told me right in there what to look for. So, and that's where I want to close. Paul talked about it replacing jobs and things like that, and it does do that. But I also think in the future, just like the example he gave of the individual who's hiring for NVIDIA, in the future, human beings who know how to use AI well are going to start displacing human beings that don't use AI at all, at least in many fields. Maybe not all fields, but in many fields. You can use it as an aid and a tool to assist you in your regular work and your regular job, and I think it can be very powerful for that.